fellow bookworms to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney and I have a bonus video for you guys. I'm really excited to do this video. I hope I have opportunities to do more videos like this in the future. But today we are going to be highlighting a new author and her very first book. So the book is called Conspiracy of Cats by B.C. Harris. I don't have a physical copy, but I do have one on the way. And yeah, it was absolutely beautifully written. It is a supernatural murder mystery, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I'm going to get into my thoughts on a second. I'm going to go ahead and lay out, how I had the opportunity to get this book and read it, the premise of the book, what I liked, and then what I didn't like about it. In the end, I did end up giving it only 4 stars. I would probably have given it 4.5 if I had the ability to do that. Um, but as far as like leaving reviews, I only gave it 4 stars. Even though I would say this is a 5-star read, there was just a few things that for me dropped it down. And like I said, it would have dropped it down to 4.5, but because I didn't have the option to do a half star, it did go down to 4. But the things that I'm going to bring up later on in the video, I want you to take with a grain of salt because I think for most people, they either wouldn't have even noticed these things or it wouldn't have been an issue for them. But just for me personally, that's why I couldn't go up to the 5 stars. But like I said, for most people, I think it's kind of mute point. So don't, you know, take what I'm saying too seriously. Read the book yourselves and definitely form your own opinion. But I'm telling you right now, it's a book that you should get and read for sure. Uh, Beautifully written. And so basically, how I came across the book is um, about 3, 4 days ago, I had a gentleman reach out to me and he asked if I would like to read and review this book. So after asking some questions, seeing what was expected of me, of course, I said absolutely, would love to do that. And it didn't hurt that it sounded like something that was right up my alley, being that it's a supernatural murder mystery. And so yeah, so we talked a little bit. He ended up sending it over on PDF, which if you've been following this channel, you know I'm not a big electronic reader. I like to have a physical copy. And talking to him, I think I could have requested a physical copy right off the bat. Because he did say, if I really enjoyed it, he was willing to send over a couple paperback copies. But for me, I one wanted to jump in the book right away, so I didn't want to wait for a physical copy. And two, I thought personally for me, I felt like if I enjoyed this book, I wanted to put some money to support this author, so I wanted to purchase it myself. And so I actually did. I have a physical copy coming, and you will see it. I have some other books coming as well, so I'm going to be doing a book haul soon, and you will see the physical copy of the book once I get that, and I will talk a little bit more in that video as well on this book. Basically, the premise of the book is it follows Joss and her uncle Peter, I would say, would be the two main characters, and Peter has been murdered. So, at the time it takes place, it's been like 14 years. Joss lost her parents 9 years prior, so she actually lives with her aunt Jude, who was Peter's wife. And they live in Scotland, and then there is the White House, which Peter built, and that's in Tanzania, Africa. And so there is a housekeeper named Biola and her husband Kissy are, the caretakers of that house. And then their son Ben also lives like in a little lodge on the land as well. And then Ben's partner Wendell, and they do like tours, safari tours or tours to popular locations and things like that. Um, but I would say the two main characters are definitely Joss and Peter. And basically, it's, learning why Peter's still hanging around, why he is tied to the White House and he's still around. And then you learn, he was murdered, and you actually learn who his murderer is right off the bat, which I loved. I think sometimes with murder mysteries, it can be drug out way too long, where in this case you learn it early on, but there's still more questions, and there's questions right up until the end, which was so much fun. And so yeah, you have Peter and you're learning, who murdered him, and then you're learning, he has this plan to kind of avenge himself, and he has plans for Joss to kind of take over, some of the things that he did in life. So, um what I really enjoyed about this book is I think there was kind of a deeper meaning to it. It kind of is about, healing from loss. Not only on Joss's part, she lost her parents, and then she meets her uncle Peter, who is a ghost, and there's kind of almost a grief there because she never really got to know him in life. And then also on Peter's part, coming to terms with his murder and not being living anymore. Like there's that kind of underlying processing going on, which I thought was really beautiful. Joss is super relatable. Like she has a lot of anxiety. She's kind of a hermit. Like she doesn't really leave the house too much. And then she's kind of floundering. She's 24 years old at this point and just floundering. She's never done anything, and so she doesn't really know what to do with her life. Um, which I again thought was really, really relatable, especially the anxiety and kind of being a hermit and not, going out and doing things. Like I can relate to that 100%. And you really see her growth throughout the book as well. I mean, not only taking this chance and going to Africa on her own, but also, just becoming more like not really outgoing, but there's a certain strength she kind of gets, like a confidence. She gets a little bit more confident as she goes on and a little bit more assertive, which I thought was absolutely like a great arc to that character for sure. And then, she's just the way the characters were built. And one thing I really enjoyed was you could tell who was talking just based on how the words were. Like I don't think I've ever come across another author who has done that so well. Because like a lot of times even like if there's like a long conversation between two characters, sometimes I get lost on who's talking. Where in this case, like I said, it didn't matter who was talking, you knew who it was just based on how they spoke. Um, because you have Wendell, who's Australian. So, there were some Australian phrases and such in there, and he would phrase things differently than like Ben, who is from Tanzania. And then you also had Joss, who's Scottish, and then Peter, who is, from all over really. I mean, they traveled a lot, but his mom was Norwegian, and so you have that kind of aspect to his talking like an English Norwegian type dialect. And this is a slight spoiler, but not really. Peter is tied to the White House. So, in order to kind of act out his plans, he uses Joss's body so he can leave the White House. And I bring this up because, again, the author did great. Like you knew exactly who was in control of Joss's body just based on the energy of the character and then the way they spoke. Which I mean, I don't know how she did it. It was just really amazing to read. But I think that really highlighted those two characters since they were sharing the same body. That really highlighted, how well the author did on using like different ways the characters spoke. Like I don't know how because you're not hearing it. So I wanted to say tones, but you're really not hearing it. But at the same time, you kind of can just based on how she wrote it. I mean, absolutely beautiful, and kind of the whole Josh, Joss Peter dynamic made me think of uh, dissociative identity disorder. I've I've been fascinated with that disorder for a long time, and I follow a lot of people that have that disorder. And just how she captured these two characters, sharing this body, made me think of that disorder because like there's that one point where Joss doesn't know how to drive, but Peter does. And so Joss has to kind of fade back. And sometimes they're kind of, co piloting the body, where, Joss is right there in the forefront, but Peter might have control. And other times, they'll just fade back, one or the other. And then the other one has like full control of the body, which just made me think of how people with dissociative identity disorder kind of describe that. And I mean, she just captured it so well. Like, absolutely loved it. And another thing, she did really well was like building the landscape of the story. I mean, I really felt like I was in Africa. I've never been. I watched a lot of different movies. I love watching like wildlife movies with like lions and such. And the way she painted it reminded me of the movie Born Free. Um, I haven't seen that movie in ages, and I'm pretty sure that's the correct title. But I love that movie with the little lion cubs and such. So that's kind of how I was picturing it as I was reading her writing, and I mean, it really did feel like you were right there, and I thought she captured the landscape of the story really well. The way she described the buildings in the story, like the White House and even where Joss and Jude live, in Scotland, the way she described those, normally when I'm reading and somebody is describing a building, I really can't picture it. It's like just kind of like a blurry vision in my mind. It's not very clear. I can still clearly picture, in particular, the White House, and I can still kind of picture the place where they lived, in Scotland as well. But I mean, the White House, the way she painted this, like I could probably do a whole floor plan on it just based on how she described it. And a lot of times I get a little lost on that, but it was so well written. Like it felt like you were walking through the floor plan as she was describing it. And I don't think that happens a whole lot. Like I said, this author did a beautiful job. Like it's very well written. There's a lot of points of humor in this book, which helps lighten the more heavy aspects of it, which I appreciated it. And then also one thing, she included the Maasai. I could be mispronouncing that. Excuse me if I am. Tribe in this, and that really added to like the cultural aspect, and it added a lot to the supernatural aspect because it wasn't just supernatural. There wasn't just this ghost, hanging around, but there's an almost spiritual aspect and a primal aspect to it, which I absolutely loved. Like, I enjoyed that part so much. I wrote down multiple times. I have 5 pages of notes, that I was just like, oh, I love this, I love this, I love this. And I wrote down atmospheric so many times throughout the book because I really think she did. It was very atmospheric and beautifully written. I know I've said that multiple times, but it really was. Um, and like I said, with the humor lightening certain things, I will say, this wasn't really a negative for me, so I'm not going to include it in that portion, but I would add a trigger warning, especially if you are an animal lover. There is some animal cruelty that happens. There's one scene with poachers, and then there's something else that happens later on as well. But I do see why the author went there. And I guess it ties in a little bit into one of the things I didn't like, but not really. Um, and so even though those scenes were quite brutal and kind of hard to stomach, I think that they did add a lot to the story, and I really do see why the author went that route. And so just when you're reading it, bear that in mind. And the one scene more towards the end, the poacher scene's very quick and done with, pretty quickly, but there is one scene towards the end that is kind of a bit longer. And it kind of goes back and forth in between because she does go back and forth between characters, and so you're getting different viewpoints, which I normally don't like that. And in this case, it added a lot to the story because you got the different viewpoints, and it wasn't confusing at all. Like normally when it goes back and forth between two characters, I kind of get confused, but in this case it wasn't. It just added more depth to whatever she was describing. So I really did enjoy that. But so the one scene, towards the end that's kind of brutal is kind of drawn out. And there's different sections to it, but you could easily, kind of just skim over that and still get the just what's happening there. Sorry, the cats. Speaking of cats, my own cat's being nosy and knocking shit over. So, but yeah, definitely, like I said, pick this book up. It was amazing. So now I'm gonna go ahead and get into what I didn't like about it. And so one of the main things that I kind of got hung up on is the hyenas. And overall, she did the hyenas very, very well. So it's a conspiracy of cats. And so there's lions and there's domestic cats that play a big role in this book. But she also includes like other wildlife. It's Africa, so of course there'd be other wildlife. And the hyenas do play a prominent part in this as well. And she has so many factual things about hyenas. I mean, things that even I didn't know, and when I was making sure, what I was thinking was right and doing research, these other things she brought up were 100% correct. She also did, there's like a scene where Ben and Wendell, I can't remember which one is talking, but they're taking these tourists, through the safari, and they're kind of talking about how hyenas are misunderstood. And they're not actually the ones that are the bullies, it's the lions that are the bullies. And that's correct too. Like that is correct. Normally the lions will come in and steal hyenas food versus hyenas coming in and stealing lions food. But she kept referring to hyenas as painted dogs. And I don't know, I know that they've traveled to Africa, and maybe locally people refer to hyenas as painted dogs. I'm not entirely sure. Or maybe she just decided to go that route. I don't know. Um, but painted dogs are actually African wild dogs, and hyenas are different. Hyenas are actually more closely related to cats. And so for me, having that knowledge, like I said, I don't think this would necessarily be something that most people would even notice or get hung up on, but it is something that I did. And so just having that knowledge, I kind of got hung up on it. And for me, it's like, I think that she could have used the feline connection there, um, rather than, referring to them as painted dogs and, making hyenas more dog like than cat like, because they are actually more closely related to cats. Obviously, there's a lot of differences there, but that's kind of what hung me up the most. The other thing that kind of dropped the book down for me was the protagonist. I'm not going to say whether it's male or female or anything like that. Like, you definitely need to just figure it out on your own. But the protagonists, they there's kind of a disconnect from how you view them in the beginning of the book to how brutal they are in the end of the book. Like I can kind of see how that character got to where they were at, but there was a little bit of a disconnect just on the brutality aspect. Like, how are they that brutal? Um, and I want to talk more on that, but I really can't without giving a big spoiler away. So I'm not going to, but just that disconnect kind of lost a little bit for me. Even though the characters themselves were so well written, it's like, but how did this protagonist get to that point? I want to know. I need more information there. And so that dropped it down for me a little bit. And then there was a few little typo issues. Again, I don't think most people would have noticed them. But I was having trouble with like certain phrasing and such, so I was rereading a lot. And most people I don't think would have trouble with the phrasing. This part is not a criticism; it's just my autistic brain and how I was trying to process, slightly different phrases than what I'm used to. Because, I struggle with that day to day just in general. And then, I'm reading this Scottish author um, who is well traveled and everything. And there's just things that got lost on me, things I had to reread to fully understand them, and things like that. And so I think because of that, I caught those typos a little bit easier. I think most people wouldn't even notice them. But those were the three things that kind of dropped it down because it kind of ruined the flow of the story for me. Um, and I just couldn't quite give it 5 stars. But again, the story itself is definitely a 5 star story. And you might read it and you might not notice the things I mentioned at all. And so I do hope, if you're watching this video, you pick up this book. It is well worth it for sure. And plus, I want you to show this author some support so she will continue to write because I'm ready for the next book. Maybe it'll be about the protagonist and how she got to the point that she did. Who knows? I would sign up to get a pre-order of that book for sure. But no, I think this author did a beautiful job, especially knowing it's her first book. And then a little introductory portion of the book, explains, she's from Scotland, but she was living in France at the time, renovating when the pandemic hit, of course, and lockdown happened. And so that's kind of what started her writing was the pandemic and lockdown, which I think a lot of us, made some changes during the pandemic. And I love that this was the route she went because I definitely enjoyed it. So, um, when you read this book, come back to this video and let me know your thoughts on it. I would absolutely love to chat about this book. And yeah, it's just very well written. There are going to be links down in the description below where you can pick up a copy of the book. I will also leave links about hyenas and painted dogs, just in case you want to learn a little bit more about them. But yeah, the author did a beautiful job. I think she did have a lot of accurate information in the book, and just how she built these characters, the spiritual kind of primal aspect of the supernatural, um, and the landscape was absolutely beautiful. So, a 5 star read, even though I only did give it 4 stars. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and leave you guys here. I'll also link the social media of the author down below as well, in addition to where you can pick up the book. But anyway, happy reading, everyone. Bye.